All right, welcome to Module 2 of the class. In the first module, we looked at the origin of the party system and the way that parties participate within the electoral system that the United States has, both the congressional election system and the electoral college system. In this module, we're going to focus on parties and party leaders as political agents. In other words, as actors in the struggle in our political system. And what is it that parties do and party leaders do? How do you become a party leader? How, as a party leader, do you operate to use your party, or how do you steer your party through the electoral and legislative system? So that's going to be the focus of Module 2, parties and their leaders as political agents, that is, participants in the political struggle. This lecture is on the partisan nature of electoral politics. There's also governing politics. So there's basically two levels of politics, and they're intertwined, of course. There's the electoral system, which is what is necessary to get into public office, and then there's the governance system, which is what elected officials do once they have office. Part of the thing to keep in mind is that this is a connected cycle. With the exception of term-limited executives, the sort of connection between electoral politics and governance is very tight because, except when you're running for office for the first time, the way that you participate in the system of governance impacts your electoral prospects. Also, the reason why parties, party leaders, candidates, independents, outside groups, voters, social movements, advocacy groups, the reason why all of those political actors participate in the electoral system is because they're looking towards the system of governance for sources of power over policy outcomes. So really the reason to participate in electoral politics, this is kind of a duh statement in a class about a democratic system, the reason to participate in electoral politics is not as an end in itself, it is as a means to the end of gaining levers of power in the system of governance. But for this lecture, I want to talk about parties and the electoral system. What are parties doing in our electoral system? Why do they participate? Why do we not just have candidates running for office who then gain office and use that office to maneuver with each other for electoral outcome or for policy outcomes? The reason is that in the system of governance, one person, even a person with an executive position, even a governor or a president, can't get their policy outcomes that they want all by themselves. They need help. Politics is a team sport, and parties are teams. Now, one of the things that you saw in the first module is that originally the founders of the American system kind of hoped and envisioned a system without parties. I mean, they didn't envision a system without cooperation and without factions and without groups of people working towards ends, but they didn't envision organized parties, and they certainly did not envision or imagine or desire a two-party system. The nature of our electoral system created the incentives to develop parties very quickly, and because of the structure of our electoral system, particularly the winner-take-all nature of our electoral rules, the party system quickly evolved and has maintained stably at a two-party system. There are, of course, other parties besides the Democratic and Republican Party, and they try to do things, but it is a two-party system with, we call these other parties third parties, even though there's third, fourth, fifth, sixth parties. They're minor parties, and they really do not play much of a role in the overall party system, except occasionally as spoilers, and also as kind of outlets for people who have very strong dissatisfaction with the two major parties, such that they can't find a way to even pick one of those two major parties. So minor parties do play a role, but in this module and for the whole course really, I'm going to be focusing on the two major parties. So parties form, and you saw why and how they develop. What is the reason that parties participate in the electoral system? The reason is simple. To win as many offices as possible so that they have the best chance of advancing their policy agenda. That is what parties are about. And really, more specifically, they're about two specific aims. One is to capture executive positions, and 2, to capture legislative majorities. Those are the goals. Those are the reasons why parties participate in the electoral system. That's because the only way you get anything done is by having one or both of those components. If the other party controls the executive branch and has majorities in both houses of the legislature, the best that you can do as a party is play defense. You can slow down or prevent the other party from advancing its policy agenda or certain pieces of its policy agenda, but you're not going to have any hope of advancing your own agenda. Now, to sort of tie in the connection between electoral politics and governance, one of the things that voters look towards parties for, and interest groups look towards parties for, is a vehicle for advancing their policy preferences. And so part of what parties are doing, and I talked about this in Module 1, is competing with each other to gain constituencies, to build a coalition. Once you have a coalition, and you then form a winning coalition, if you win elections, you get executive positions, you get legislative majorities, then your supporters expect results. Now, if you're the party that's on the losing side and you're playing defense, you can enhance your electoral prospects in the future by creating dissatisfaction with the party that has control over the major levers of power. So it's not as though you lose an election and you lick your wounds and say, okay, well, we'll get back in the game next time. You are going to get back in the game for the next election cycle, but between the losing election and the next election, you're looking towards that next election by playing defense so that you can, 1, block the opposing party's agenda because you don't support that agenda, and 2, generate dissatisfaction with enough of the coalition that the other party put together, winning coalition, to peel off some support so that you can have hope of winning the next election. American politics really does, there are lots of things that go on and there are a lot of dynamics, but it really does ultimately boil down on the largest scale to each election is more or less a referendum on the ins. Who has power, and are they doing with it what their constituency, their coalition, wants them to do? Enough of it? Are they providing enough victories and enough sort of rhetorical cover for themselves to continue holding together that winning coalition, or are they not? The in-party has to try to do things, and the only way you can really do things is to have the most levers of power, right? If you have a majority in both houses of the legislature, but the executive branch is controlled by the other party, you're not going to get as much done as if you have unified government. But if you have unified government, the expectations then go up that you're going to do something with that power. What are you going to do with it? So the reason why parties compete in elections is to win majorities in executive positions so they can advance their agenda, so that they can please their constituency and hold together their coalition to continue winning elections in the future so that they can continue advancing their agenda. The out party, the losing party, is trying to block that progress so that they can create dissatisfaction, peel off some voters, and go from being the out party to being the in party. Now, the process of doing that is more complicated than just a national support for or opposition to a particular party, because, and this is something you should remember from Module 1, the congressional election system is not an election for Congress. It is not an overall vote to, if 60% of Americans vote for Democrats, the Democrats don't necessarily get 60% of the seats in the legislature. We don't have that kind of proportional system. Our electoral system is seat by seat. So parties, in seeking majorities, now of course executive positions are different because if you get the majority of votes in a statewide election, like for the governor's positions, or if you win the electoral college for presidential elections, you get all of that. Like you capture the entire executive power. Though in many states, and this is I won't get into this, but I'll just note that in many states there is a multiple executive, so there's not just the governor wins and then the governor controls the entirety of the executive branch. That's true at the federal level. Whichever party captures the presidency controls the entire executive branch. In states, there are usually 2, 3, 4, 5, even half a dozen statewide offices that are won by a mixture of candidates from the different parties. And so there's even if you win the governorship, you don't necessarily have a unified government if you have a majority in both houses of Congress or both houses of the state legislature. At least you can avoid a veto. In any case, I don't want to get into too much of that complication because it muddies the point. The point is that if you do get the executive position, you have major levers of power. In order to get the really fundamental levers of power, which is control of the legislature, you need majorities in both houses of the legislature. And in order to do that, you have to win individual seats, one at a time. Now, if you recall back to the lesson on congressional elections, there are districts, 435 districts, and not all of those districts are competitive. In fact, about 4/5 of those districts are not competitive. Parties have them in their safe column. Now, that doesn't mean that a safe district is always 100% safe a lock. There are times when dissatisfaction with the in-party can rise to such levels that it actually eats into the safe seats. But even still, even when a set of safe seats gets eroded by a wave election, it's not going to be all of the safe seats. It's going to be the least safe of the seats. But really, for all intents and purposes, the parties have locked down about 4/5 of the seats in Congress. Different states, it varies what the safe seats are, depending on the political demographics of that particular state. But it's true in all the states, too, that there are a variety of safe seats for Republicans and for Democrats. And so they're not competing for every single seat. But they do have to win their majorities in that gray area, in that we're, I guess the better term for electoral politics is that purple area where a district could go one way or another. But you don't win all the purple districts at a time. You have to win them one at a time. So parties are seeking executive positions, but they're seeking electoral or legislative majorities so that they can have control over the levers of power. To get a legislative majority, you have to win one seat at a time. Now, in the U.S. Senate, where the seats come up only 1/3 of them in each election cycle, to move the Senate from control from one party to another often takes multiple election cycles. In the House of Representatives, you can flip the House from Democratic to Republican control or vice versa with one election because all 435 seats are up for election. In the state legislatures, typically the House of Representatives is like the U.S. House of Representatives, where all the seats are up every 2 years, and the state Senate is usually like the House, but on a longer election cycle. So, for example, in Oregon, it's a 4-year election cycle, and so the 50% of the seats are up every 2 years. So, still harder to flip the Senate in a state like Oregon, but easier than at the federal level. So parties are participating in electoral politics with the simple goal of capturing the levers of power. And they have to do so one election at a time. And you have to win a lot of different elections to have control over levers of power. You have to win a ton of elections to have legislative majorities. You have to win one election at the federal level and one or more elections at the state level to have all the levers of power available in the executive branch. And then you have to win a combination of executive and legislative elections to have unified government. Now, you don't require unified government to get forward progress on policy. There is the possibility, much more so at the states than at the federal level, to have progress on your agenda with a legislative majority and an opposing party governor. It's much easier to get stuff done when you have two legislative majorities, essentially a unified legislature, and then an opposing party governor, because then the legislative leaders from both houses can kind of get together, decide how they're going to negotiate, and then it's a two-party negotiation between the executive and the legislature. If the divided government is that one party holds the executive position and one of the two houses, then it becomes a three-way negotiation because executives have different priorities than legislative leaders. One of the tasks of party leaders is to hold together their leadership so that they have a more unified negotiating bloc. But given that for example, especially in the Senate in the United States, Senate leaders and House leaders, their members have different constituencies, very different constituencies. And so the Democratic leaders in the House of Representatives and the Democratic leaders in the Senate aren't necessarily going to have the same set of priorities. So even if we had a unified Congress at the federal level, Democrats controlling the Senate and Democrats controlling the House, there's still going to be some negotiation between and among the Senate leaders and the House leaders. But that's a way happier situation to have. You can kind of take care of things in-house instead of having to work with the opposing party. Okay. So, so that I don't end up getting redundant, I'm just going to summarize quickly. The reason why parties participate in elections is so that they can capture as many levers of power as possible in the system of governance, so that they can advance their agenda, block the agenda of the other side, and please their constituents and their coalition members, or work to dissatisfy the constituents and coalition members of the opposing party. And that's what's going on in electoral politics, sort of at its most abstract. In your assignments, you're seeing what's going on in electoral politics very concretely, district or state at a time, and that is really where it all happens. I can give generalities about parties as they participate in elections, but every district, every state, every seat has its own specific political dynamic. And so I can make generalizations about what parties are trying to do, but politics is all local. All of the elections take place right there where people live. And so what parties have to do is work with that geography, with the political landscape, with the concerns of the people there, with the specific partisan distribution of voters in that district or state at that particular moment. That's the challenge. Okay, in upcoming lectures for this module, I'm going to break down the different stages of the way that parties participate in the electoral and the system of governance.